There are two ways to look at gray hair, and most viewers have only heard one. The Western dermatology textbook names a pigment cell, a depleted enzyme, and a deficient mineral. The Chinese kitchen, and I am thinking specifically of my grandmother's kitchen in the Datong neighborhood of Taipei in the 1960s, names a kidney, a season, and a bowl of black sesame paste. Both traditions describe the same biological event. Neither one is wrong. And the place where they meet is the most useful place to stand if you are over 60 and noticing the silver at your temples arriving faster than you expected. I was a registered nurse at Kaiser, Oakland for 40 years. Cardiology mostly. I retired in 2023. I learned to cook from my grandmother before I learned to read English, and I watched her treat what we now call premature graying with a clay bowl of black sesame and a slow-simmered root my mother brought back from the herbalist 3 blocks away. I did not understand the mechanism then. I understand it now. The mechanism is copper. The mechanism is B12. The mechanism is an enzyme called catalase. And it is also, in a way my grandmother would have phrased differently, kidney essence, the Chinese term for the storehouse of mineral and metabolic reserves the body draws down across a lifetime. Let me start with what is actually happening inside a hair follicle when the color drains out. Every hair grows out of a follicle. At its base sits a population of pigment cells called melanocytes. These cells take an amino acid called tyrosine and, through a chain of enzymatic steps, convert it into melanin. There are 2 forms, eumelanin, which is brown to black, and pheomelanin, which is red to yellow. Asian hair is dominated by eumelanin. As we age, the melanocytes at the base of each follicle gradually lose function and eventually die. When a follicle has no functional melanocytes, the new hair grows in white. The textbook stops there. The actual biology underneath is where the kitchen comes back in. The melanocyte is one of the most metabolically demanding cells in the body. Producing pigment generates tremendous oxidative stress. Specifically, hydrogen peroxide accumulates inside the cell as a byproduct. Hydrogen peroxide is the same molecule used to bleach a stain at home. The melanocyte is, in a sense, bleaching itself every time it makes pigment. A single enzyme inside the cell, called catalase, neutralizes that hydrogen peroxide, converting it into water and oxygen. Without enough catalase, hydrogen peroxide accumulates. The melanocyte's own machinery is oxidized from the inside, and the cell shuts down pigment production. The hair grows in white. In 2009, a research group at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom, working with Dr. Karin Schallreuter, published a paper in the FASEB Journal documenting exactly this. They examined hair follicles of subjects with significant graying and found massive accumulations of hydrogen peroxide and dramatically reduced catalase activity. The lead author called it a chemical bleaching of the hair from the inside out. Your hair is not losing color because of the mysterious passage of years. It is losing color because a specific protective enzyme is running below speed, and a specific oxidative byproduct is accumulating faster than the cell can clear it. The first statement is fatalism. The second is mechanism. And mechanism is what you can intervene on. Now here is the piece the popular articles skip. Catalase requires a specific trace mineral to function, iron heme at its core, and copper as a cofactor in the broader antioxidant network. Without adequate copper, the related enzymes, superoxide dismutase, ceruloplasmin, tyrosinase itself, all run slower. Tyrosinase, the enzyme that initiates pigment production, is a copper-dependent enzyme. You cannot make melanin without copper. You cannot protect the cell that makes melanin without copper. And the average American adult over 60, according to NHANES nutrition data analyzed in 2021, runs roughly a third lower in serum copper than the same demographic ran in 1971. We have been drifting quietly into mild copper insufficiency for 50 years. There is another nutrient on this list, vitamin B12. B12 is required for the synthesis of S-adenosylmethionine, the methyl donor the cell uses to regulate, among many other things, pigment production genes. Roughly 1 in 5 adults over 60 in the United States is functionally deficient in B12, not because they are not eating it, but because the absorption mechanism in the stomach declines with age and with chronic use of acid-suppressing medications. There is a documented clinical phenomenon, well described in the dermatology literature, of premature graying that reverses partially when B12 deficiency is identified and corrected. The Indian Journal of Dermatology published a case series on this in 2013. The repigmentation is not always complete, but the trajectory bends. Not cure, trajectory. Now hold all of that. Hold copper, hold B12, hold catalase, hold the oxidative pressure on the melanocyte. I want to step out of the laboratory and into a kitchen. My grandmother was born in 1898 in a village outside Taipei. She raised 6 children. She lived to 96. Her hair, the day she died, was still half dark. The other half had gone silver in her late 70s, not her 50s, not her 60s, her late 70s. I am not claiming she was a genetic exception. I am claiming that her kitchen practice across decades reflected accumulated knowledge about what slows graying, and that the knowledge was not superstition. It was nutrition, organized around 3 ingredients she put on the table at least once a week. The first was black sesame. The Chinese name is Heiji Ma. She would toast a small handful of black sesame seeds in a dry pan, grind them into a coarse paste with a stone mortar, and stir it into rice porridge or sweeten it slightly to eat with a spoon. Black sesame, per 100 grams, contains roughly 970 milligrams of calcium, about 6.5 milligrams of iron, and roughly 1 milligram of copper, the entire daily requirement for an adult. The same 100 grams contains around 18 grams of protein and a substantial dose of zinc, magnesium, and vitamin E. The zinc to copper ratio is close to the ratio your body actually needs for the antioxidant enzymes to assemble correctly. My grandmother did not know about ceruloplasmin. She knew black sesame paste was what you fed children whose hair came in pale and elders whose hair had begun to silver. The practice was empirical. The mechanism is now identified. The second ingredient was more controversial, and I will handle it carefully. He shou wu, the prepared root of Polygonum multiflorum. It translates literally as black hair Mr. He, named after a legendary figure who supposedly restored his greying hair with this root in the Tang dynasty. Modern clinical research, primarily out of Chinese and Korean universities, has documented that compounds in the prepared root, particularly stilbene glycosides, have measurable antioxidant activity and influence pigment cell metabolism in cell culture studies and small clinical trials. I want to be careful. He shou wu is one of the most studied traditional herbs, and it is also one of the most flagged in the modern pharmacovigilance literature for liver-related adverse events when taken in concentrated supplement form, particularly raw and at high doses. The traditional kitchen preparation, small amounts of properly prepared root simmered in soup, eaten as part of a broader meal, is not the same exposure as a high-dose capsule. Do not treat it as a standalone supplement. Treat it as one ingredient inside a balanced approach, and bring the conversation to your physician, especially if you are on medications metabolized by the liver. Handle it the way it was handled traditionally, as part of the soup, not as a pill on the counter. The third ingredient was Korean black beans. The variety used is sorite, the soybean with the dark coat and green-tinged interior. Across Korean households, black bean tea and stewed black beans were a fixture of older adults' weekly meals. The dark pigment in the bean coat is anthocyanin, a flavonoid family with strong antioxidant activity at the cellular level. There is a small but consistent literature out of Seoul National University documenting that regular black bean intake is associated with measurable reductions in oxidative stress markers in older adults. The randomized trial data is not yet abundant. I will be more confident than the data warrants when I say this. Anthocyanin from food is one of the simplest, cheapest oxidative load reductions you can make. There is a fourth piece: Japanese seaweed, kombu, wakame, nori, supplies trace iodine and a compound called fucoxanthin with documented antioxidant properties. More importantly, traditional Japanese diets supplied a steady background of trace minerals, selenium, zinc, copper, iodine, through daily inclusion of small amounts of dried seaweed. The Okinawan Centenarian study, running for over 45 years across thousands of subjects, documents that the dietary mineral profile of traditional Okinawan elders is substantially richer in trace minerals than that of American elders of the same age. Put the picture together: black sesame for copper and zinc, black beans for anthocyanin and protein, seaweed for trace minerals, he shou wu carefully as a soup ingredient. plus adequate B12, which in the traditional Asian diet came from clams, oysters, mackerel, and eggs. Looked at from the lab side, that is exactly the nutrient stack the catalase pathway and the melanocytes' antioxidant defense system require. Looked at from the kitchen side, it is what my grandmother put on the table without thinking. 2 traditions, 1 body. The same answer arrived at through different routes. You are not going to wake up tomorrow with black hair. Repigmentation, when it happens slowly, typically over 3 to 6 months of sustained dietary change, sometimes longer, and not for everyone. Follicles that have fully lost their melanocyte population are unlikely to recover. Follicles still struggling with melanocytes that are undersupplied rather than dead are the ones that respond. If you supply the nutrients the pigment cell needs, the cells still alive will work better. That is the honest version of the claim. Not reversal, not miracle. Better function in the cells that have not yet died. There is something else worth knowing. The original Bradford paper framed graying as a chemical bleaching driven by hydrogen peroxide. The follow-up literature has complicated that picture. Stress, psychological stress, sustained over months and years, appears to actively deplete the stem cell reservoir at the base of the follicle through a sympathetic nervous system pathway involving norepinephrine. The Harvard study, published in Nature in 2020 by Dr. Su's group, showed this in mice with elegance. Stress, mediated through specific nerve signaling, exhausts the melanocyte stem cells from the root. Gray hair is not only oxidative, it is also partly a stress phenomenon, which means the protective protocol is not only nutritional, it is also lifestyle. What did my grandmother do that addressed the stress side? She slept by 10. She walked in the morning. She drank green tea 3 times a day. She did qigong in the courtyard at 6 a.m. with about 6 other elderly women. The traditional Asian afternoon nap, shu shi in Mandarin, o hirune in Japanese, was daily practice across generations and is now documented in cardiovascular research as substantially protective. None of these are exotic. None are unaffordable. They are the texture of how a generation lived before the modern American sympathetic nervous system overdrive became the default. For those of you watching because of someone you love, a parent, a spouse, who has aged faster than expected, the kitchen door may be the door that opens. Most Asian American elders will eat black sesame porridge on a Tuesday morning without comment. Most will sip black bean tea without resistance. Most will accept a bowl of seaweed soup as normal. You are not asking your mother to take something foreign. You are asking her to eat what her own mother fed her in 1945. The same nutrients that protect the melanocyte also protect cognition, bone, and cardiac function in the same demographic. The whole pattern moves together. If you want a self-check before changing anything, here are the markers. Ask your physician for serum vitamin B12, methylmalonic acid, a more sensitive B12 indicator than serum level alone, serum copper, ceruloplasmin, and ferritin. These 5 values together tell you whether the substrates the catalase melanocyte pathway requires are present in your bloodstream. If any are below the reference range, you have a specific, addressable insufficiency. Not aging, insufficiency. That distinction matters. Aging is not modifiable. Insufficiency is. Let me give you the practical version. For the next 90 days, try this. 1 small bowl of toasted ground black sesame per week, stirred into oatmeal or rice porridge, about 2 tablespoons, less than 50 cents per serving at an Asian grocery store. 2 cups of brewed black bean tea per week, made from roasted black soybeans, steeped for 10 minutes. Seaweed in your soup at least twice a week. Kombu in a stock pot, or a tablespoon of dried wakame near the end of cooking. If you tolerate eggs, 2 whole eggs per day for B12 and choline. If you do not eat eggs, ask your doctor about a methylcobalamin supplement. Methylcobalamin, not cyanocobalamin, because the methylated form is the active version and is better absorbed by adults over 60. That conversation goes through your physician, not through me. Walk 20 minutes after dinner. Sleep by 10:30 if you can. The shu-shi nap in the early afternoon, 15 to 20 minutes. Slow movement in the morning, whether qigong or tai chi or stretching, 10 minutes is enough to register on your nervous system. A few notes on the medications that interfere with this pathway. Smoking accelerates oxidative stress at the follicle level dramatically. A 2013 study from researchers in Jordan documented a 2.5 times higher rate of premature graying in smokers compared with non-smokers in the same age band. Long-term proton pump inhibitor use, the omeprazole family, which a substantial portion of adults over 60 are on for reflux, reduces B12 absorption from food significantly. Metformin, the most prescribed oral diabetes medication, also reduces B12 absorption over years of use. If you are on PPI therapy or metformin, your B12 level should be checked annually. Most patients on chronic PPI therapy require some form of B12 supplementation regardless of diet. That conversation again goes through your physician. One caveat on early onset graying. If you are 40 and your hair is 2/3 silver, ask your doctor for a thyroid-stimulating hormone level, a free T4, and an autoimmune marker panel before assuming the cause is nutritional alone. The food piece still helps. It just is not the whole story for your specific case. On supplements, I am cautious. Self-supplementing copper without testing is not reasonable. Copper has a relatively narrow therapeutic window, and excess copper accumulation is associated with its own set of problems. The food version, black sesame, oysters, organ meat sparingly, dark chocolate in small amounts, cashews, does not have this overdose problem. Start with food. Add the supplement only after testing and medical conversation. One last piece of biology I find genuinely moving. Researchers at NYU Langone, led by Dr. Mayumi Ito and published in Nature in 2023, demonstrated that in mice, melanocyte stem cells normally move between two zones in the follicle in a dynamic cycle, and that with age, this movement gets stuck. The stem cells become trapped in one location and lose their ability to mature into pigment-producing cells. Graying in this newer model is not only the death of existing melanocytes, it is also the immobilization of the stem cells that would have replaced them. The mouse data and the human translation are not yet bridged, but the cellular biology is the same biology that responds to copper, to antioxidant load, to systemic inflammatory tone. The pattern of life that protects the stem cells in the follicle is the same pattern that protects the stem cells in the brain, in the bone marrow, in the gut. You are not fixing one cell type. You are reducing the chronic background pressure on every regenerative cell population in the body. The hair color is one visible signal among many invisible ones. The Bama County Longevity Research in Guangxi, China, which has followed thousands of elders across 2 decades, documents that the centenarians of that region maintain darker hair, on average, into their 70s and 80s than American populations of the same age. The dietary pattern in Bama is heavy in sweet potato, hemp seed, fermented vegetables, fresh river fish, and locally grown black beans. The mineral content of that pattern, measured against U.S. dietary norms, is substantially richer in copper, zinc, selenium, and magnesium. The Bama elders are not genetically protected against gray hair. They are nutritionally protected. The lifestyle protects too. Slow village life, walking as transportation, afternoon naps as cultural norm, dinner at 5 p.m. The whole pattern of life cooperates with the hair follicle, and the follicle responds in the only way it knows how, which is to keep producing pigment for as long as the substrate is supplied. A practical note about cooking the black sesame, so the nutrients are actually absorbed. The whole untoasted seed has a tough outer hull. The digestive tract does not break down efficiently. If you eat raw black sesame seeds whole, most of the copper and zinc and protein pass through unabsorbed. The traditional preparation, toasting in a dry pan over low heat for 3 to 5 minutes until fragrant, then grinding to a coarse paste, is not aesthetic preference. It is bioavailability. The toasting partially breaks the hull and develops the flavor. The grinding releases the oil-soluble compounds and the minerals from the seed matrix. Take 10 minutes on a Sunday afternoon. Toast a cup of black sesame, grind it, store it in a small jar in the refrigerator, and use a spoonful per day across the week. About $3 total. The system most viewers interact with has a 12-minute office visit slot and a billing code structure that does not have a category for what I have just described. The pharmaceutical pipeline has not produced a drug for grey hair because the commercial pathway is not obvious, and the food intervention does not pay anyone except the grocer. That is not malice, that is throughput and incentive structure. The information has to come from somewhere else. Grey hair in this culture and in this generation is often the first visible signal of aging you cannot hide from. The skin changes are gradual. The energy changes are subjective. The hair changes are public. The food I am describing does not target appearance. It targets the cellular health underneath the appearance. The hair color, if it responds, is a side effect of the underlying improvement, not the goal. Frame it that way, and the work is sustainable. Frame it as a cosmetic intervention, and the disappointment when the response is partial will dominate. Frame it as a cellular intervention, and the wins are broader. The 80-year-old grandmother in Datong did exactly this in her kitchen in 1965 without knowing the word bioavailability and without needing to. The method preserved the nutrients because generations of trial and error had established that it did. Modern food science arrived at the same conclusion. The kitchen knew first. The lab caught up. If this is the kind of bridge between traditions you want more of, the subscribe button is in its usual spot. The next video continues directly. The same nutrient cluster, looked at from the angle of bone and cardiac instead of hair. Once you see the pattern from one angle, you will see it from the others. What grandmothers knew, what papers confirm. Until the next breakdown.